We had always had a cleaning lady who came in twice a week, so even after a few days Lily's perfume was no longer hanging in the air. Yet still there was so much to remind me of her. I would walk into a room and see a picture on the wall, one she had chosen with me, and my eyes would moisten. The linen on my bed, washed, dried, and pressed, was a pattern that Lily had admired and bought. I would look at them and see us together, nakedly embracing, loving each other, joined together in that most intimate of moments that lovers share. Yet again I would succumb to anger, cursing her and Bennington for ruining something that was almost perfect. Then I would feel guilty for cursing Lily. I loved her, and that was a burden I would suffer for the rest of my life. Vin came up with the goods, a list of vehicle numbers. He had 18 of them, and the best thing of all, they were all registered to a leasing company. Bennington and his crooked company secretary, who had to be in on this, was claiming depreciation and servicing on vehicles the company didn't own. What else were they up to? I was sure they had other scams going, but I didn't really have the time to go looking. This scam was false accounting and deserved a jail sentence. Therein lay a problem. I could report this to the Inland Revenue, but the less I had to do with those worthies the better. They are a suspicious lot, and they would wonder why I was looking into a company to which I had no connection. Would they in their turn take a look at me? My accounts were good, but there was always the possibility that they could get lucky. Vin added some unasked for information. Your wife is no longer working there, Mr. Martin. Did that please me? I wondered. I needed documentary proof that the vehicles were owned by the leasing company. I wrote to them posing as an outside auditor saying that the copy of the agreement sent to me had been inadvertently shredded by one of my staff, and I felt too embarrassed to ask Elwin Dax for another copy. 2 weeks later I had the copy, listing all the vehicles that were covered by the agreement. I had researched the company. There are many internet sites where you could get information. I had to access quite a few before I put together the picture. Founded in 1897 to ship milled grain from rural Essex to the bakeries in London, it had led a profitable but unspectacular existence. Just after the First World War, it had taken advantage of the huge numbers of ex-army goods vehicles being sold off cheaply to expand into general parcel traffic. The grain business had withered over the years, and today their operation was as general hauliers and warehousing. It had never changed its corporate status, and today the shareholders were comprised mainly of descendants of Elwin Dax. Whereas once the shares were held in entirety by 3 people, the children of the founder, today they had devolved to some 22 descendants, all owning less than 10% of the shares, apart from 2 who together held just over 30%. Those 2 were also listed as directors. A plan was coming to my mind. I wondered how much acumen those 2 directors could boast. One was Lieutenant General RETD A.R. Stanley, and the other was a Mrs. T.B. Dax. The other directors were Bennington himself and a J.M. Chambers, who was company secretary. Did the General and Mrs. Dax understand that as directors they were legally responsible for the accuracy of the company accounts as submitted to the Inland Revenue and Company's House? I doubted that. Did they also understand that as an asset that bolstered the profitability wasn't an asset, the company could be said to be trading while insolvent? A criminal offense. Now what was I going to do with my knowledge? I would talk to Frank, as I thought there was an opportunity for his getting an enterprise that could be profitable for very little outlay. He was dubious at first. Jess, all this mucking about just to get revenge on this bloke. I can send a couple of blokes up to give him a good smacking. That's simple and to the point. True, Frank. But unless they are going to snuff him, he will recover, and he will still be sitting pretty with his lifestyle and position intact. Of course, there is the little matter of that being GBH, just a tad illegal. I reminded him. My way is going to ruin him financially for the rest of his life. He could get some stir as well. And what I am doing is legal. Frank sighed. Okay, Jess, I'll go along with you, but what is it going to cost? All I need is your name. I'll fund it, but I don't want my name on the documents. That could alert Bennington. At the end of this, you could have a good going concern giving you nice profits. Damn you, Jess. You are going to get me going straight. I can see it now. Frank Weston, pillar of the community. My dad would turn in his grave. I had the same conversation with Jack Hallam, another of my clients who followed a similar lifestyle to Frank Weston. Frank knew I would approach Jack and had no trouble with it. Neither did Jack. He heard the story and offered the same service that Frank had offered. Again, I persuaded him that my way was better. I wouldn't do it for anyone but you, Jess. You have always dealt straight with me, and your advice has been sound. Count me in. The reason that I wanted another name was so that I didn't buy so many shares in one name that would alert the major shareholders. The shareholders register gave me their addresses, and I wrote to all the smaller shareholders, saying that my principal was interested in purchasing their shares and offering a price that would make their eyes sparkle. I wasn't surprised at their eagerness to bite. They had always got dividends, but not as much as they would wish. The vision of a few £1,000s for shares that they had considered mediocre was too good an opportunity. They didn't all bite, but sufficient did to get me clout at the next shareholders meeting. I would be the proxy for Frank and Jack. The shareholder meeting was to be held in March, some months away, primarily to agree the accounts and set the dividend. I gathered from those shareholders who had agreed to sell that few bothered to attend the meeting. Having inherited their shares, rather than being serious investors, they had little interest in the proceedings. So I was not surprised when at the appointed time, I joined the meeting, noticing that the attendance was limited to Mrs. Dax, Lieutenant General Stanley, Bennington, Chambers, and I. Eyebrows were raised as I entered the boardroom and I was asked my business. I produced the written proxies that Frank and Jack had written for me. It was Chambers who checked those and then said, "Welcome to the meeting, Mr. Martin." Suddenly Bennington looked as if he had swallowed a live frog. I could see it going through his mind. Was I the Martin he had cucked? Stanley brought the meeting to order. The accounts were distributed for perusal. Mrs. Dax and the General didn't really bother to read them, proof of my assumption that they did not have a business background. I studied them acutely. That wasn't the usual practice here, and both Chambers and Bennington fidgeted uncomfortably. "Is there something you don't understand, Mr. Martin?" asked Chambers. "No, nothing at all." "Why? Am I holding you up?" "No, not at all. If there is something you have a problem with, perhaps I can explain." Chambers returned. "Oh, I am sorry." I smiled. I was going to enjoy the next bit. I brought out my card and slipped it over to him. "As you can see, I am qualified, as you are. Accountants always check, don't we?" Chambers wasn't happy. He pushed my card over to Bennington. He looked as if the frog had climbed all the way back up again. Stanley had got his pen out in preparation for signing. I looked over to him. "Lieutenant General, I wouldn't sign those if I were you. You would be committing an offense." "What? What do you mean, sir?" "I'm sorry to have to tell you that these accounts are inaccurate, not to say false." The General looked fiercely at me. "Mr. Martin, you had better be prepared to back up that accusation. We are wasting time," Bennington said loudly. "There are other things to discuss." I ignored him and answered the General. "Of course, sir. Would you be so kind as to find the item referring to maintenance and depreciation on the vehicle fleet?" He found the item. "Yes. Looks perfectly straightforward to me." "It would, General, if the company actually owned the vehicles." "Of course we do. Owned the fleet for years." I shook my head. "No, sir." I opened the folder and pulled out the copy of the leasing agreement, sliding it across the table to him. "Would you care to look at that agreement?" Then I brought out the list of vehicles covered by the agreement. I slid that over to him. "That is the list of vehicles. I believe you will find it comprehensive." He read the agreement and then the list, passing them over to Mrs. Dax for her to see. The signatures on the agreement for the company were Bennington and Chambers. Those two gentlemen seemed to be sitting on hot bricks, their faces flushed hotly. The General had seen enough. "Bennington, I think you have some explaining to do. We'll go into your office and you can tell me what is going on." I didn't want that. The General probably didn't know enough about accounting and Bennington would use quality wool to pull over his eyes. "General," I caught his attention. "This has been going on for years. An explanation for this year's accounts is insufficient. Without this asset, the company could be said to be trading while insolvent, and that is a criminal offense. I would advise that the company cease trading immediately and have a full independent audit carried out." "That's not necessary," shouted Bennington. He and Chambers were looking decidedly unhappy. "Be quiet, man." The General used a voice more suited to the parade ground. He was thinking. He turned and had a whispered conversation with Mrs. Dax. She nodded and looked at me. "Mr. Martin, am I and the General in danger of prosecution?" I nodded. "Yes, I think you could be." "Then I think the General and I would vote to take your proposal. I second your motion." Chambers had to note the motion in the minutes, then asked, "All those in favor?" The General's and Mrs. Dax's hands went up, as did mine. They had over 30% of the shares between them. I had proxy votes for 22%. It was no contest. I was leaving after the meeting when by chance I bumped into Bennington. He looked daggers at me. "Creep." I nodded. "It takes one to know one." I replied. "Don't mess with little runt bookkeepers with little dicks. Some of us have clout." Now he could have no doubt as to whom I was. I felt quite certain that the audit would throw up other questions for Bennington to answer. What's it like to be looking from the precipice and knowing that you had no way of avoiding the fall? For weeks later, the independent auditors had finished. As a shareholder, Frank received a copy of the report and brought it round to me. "I can't understand head or tail of it. What does it tell us?" I read through it quickly, noticing as I did his looking around with distaste. "Why the hell don't you get somewhere better?" he asked. "This place is a shithole." I ignored that for a moment. The report bore out all the thoughts I had. Bennington was up to so many scams, basically ripping off his shareholders and the inland revenue with false accounting. The auditors had notified the revenue, and they were starting up their grinder. They moved slowly but very, very thoroughly, missing nothing, which would eventually spit Bennington and Chambers out in little pieces. The police were already involved. Bennington had sentenced me to a whole world of pain, and now he was going to experience the feeling. I explained the report and told Frank what it meant for Bennington. He winced. "I am sure he will be going to a place where he will make the acquaintance of some of your acquaintances." He laughed. Then I went on to answer his other question. "Frank, I stay here because it suits. If I move to more salubrious premises, people would notice. The taxman may get curious, and the last thing I, or you for that matter, want is the taxman getting curious. So I stay here. They think I am just a plodding accountant, not bursting with bright ideas to avoid taxes, so they leave me alone. That suits me." He grinned. "I thought you would say that. Now what do we do with this company you have just ruined?" "It's not ruined. It's viable. I would imagine that the shareholders will be happy to sell their shares for a nominal figure, and if you or Jack would like to take control, it won't cost you too much. You get a profitable concern, running wagons all over the country and possibly abroad." I threw that in to see if he would take notice. He did. That could be interesting." Frank left thinking deeply. I decided it was time to add to Bennington's agony. Vin collected from me envelopes containing copies of the DVD and the screen grabs. These he delivered by hand to Bennington's, Haskins, and Wello's homes, just slipping them through the letterboxes. The solicitors would be very grateful for the business I was providing for them. The general phoned me a few weeks later. "Mr. Martin, my cousin, Mrs. Dax, and I would like to thank you for your assistance. It looks like we will have to pay a fine to the tax man, but that shouldn't be too much. They seem to be saving most of their ire for Bennington and Chambers. Could you advise us further about what we should do with the company? To be honest, neither of us is too interested in maintaining our connection. General Stanley, I think that possibly my principals, Mr. Weston and Mr. Hallam, could be persuaded to take it on. But with the bad publicity, it would need subsidizing for a while to get it back up and running." "Understood. If you would talk to them for us, see what they say. The shares are not worth more than a pittance now, so we will accept any reasonable offer." Vin was proving very useful. The man seemed to keep his ear to the ground, and a couple of months had gone by when he called at the office. This time he did accept a cup of coffee. He handed me a couple of newspapers. One was the Chelmsford Weekly News. The front page reported the problems at the old established local company, Elwyn Dax Limited, and the Inland Revenue investigation. Then ringed on another page was an item describing how Mrs. Ida Bennington was divorcing her husband Walter. Mention was made of some photos showing him in an intimate embrace with a young woman. The other paper was the South End Standard. This story covered the abrupt departure from a local manufacturing company of two executives, a Mr. K.B. Haskins and a Mr. M. Wello, both dismissed for bringing the company into disrepute and activities unbecoming for their status. It also mentioned that they were both recently estranged from their wives. I thanked Vin for his thoughtfulness. So I had my revenge and suddenly felt flat. Whilst I was working towards getting retribution, I was quite fired up, excited even as everything came together. Now, I don't know what I felt. I was empty. It was 12 months now since I had insisted Lily leave. The year had been busy with my normal work and then with my extracurricular activities. I hadn't stopped long enough to give thought to where my life was going and what I would do. At one time it was simple. I would work until I decided that my investments abroad were sufficient and then retire, for Lily and me to move to a better climate and an easier, comfortable life. Bennington and his cohorts had put an end to that dream. I couldn't think of finding another woman to share my life. Once bitten, twice shy were the watchwords. Any woman in my life, however loving, would suffer a lack of trust on my part. Viewing her actions with suspicion would erode any relationship, descending into argument and mistrust. Deprived of my ambitions, I did what I knew best and buried myself in the exacting world of accountancy. The general telephoned me to tell me that Frank and Jack had declined to buy the shares. "Looks like we're stuck with them." He then went on, "Mr. Martin, you said the company was viable if run properly." I agreed I had said that. "Well, would you consider running it for us? I would be willing to make you a gift of shares, to give you an incentive, and I am sure that there could be a good salary as well." "General, I am flattered by your offer, but I should tell you that accountants are not the right people to run companies. You need an entrepreneur, a man with ideas, willing to take a chance. Accountants by their training are incapable of that. All you need for proof is the large concerns in this country that failed. British Rail, British Steel, Austin Rover, all run by accountants. I take your point. Bloody Army is run by accountants now, he said bitterly. Moving on. I was wondering if you would agree to come and take lunch with me. My cousin, Mrs. Dax, is as eager as I to show our gratitude for your intervention. I believe you live near to Chelmsford. Would Tuesday next week suit? It was obvious that he was not used to having no for an answer, so I accepted. He gave me his address. He lived just outside Danbury. He finished with, 12 to 12:30 will be fine. I drove over to Danbury in quite a good mood. 12 months had passed since I had asked Lily to leave, and in those 12 months, I had not gone out socially even once. I quite liked the general. He was a bit of a throwback, but easy to get on with. He didn't need to act the old soldier. He was one, and I am sure he had a fund of interesting stories. His home was not quite what I expected. Visions of a manorial residence surrounded by a park disappeared as I arrived at a modest bungalow, the imagined park becoming a very neat, well-kept garden. He welcomed me at the door. Mr. Martin, thank you so much for coming. It's good to see you again, General. Ambrose is the label. Chad. He nodded. Short for Charles I, presume. He invited me in to where Mrs. Dax stood up to greet me. She told me to call her Terry. It was really Teresa. I have been Terry all my life. Ambrose got us drinks and sat down. Chad, I am speaking for both of you when I say that you have done us a great service. I, as you can imagine, inherited these shares. The Army doesn't have too much need for accountants, and I know absolutely nothing about running a business. Terry's husband was the last of the actual Daxes to take a hands-on interest in the business. When he died, Bennington seemed like our savior. We would never have known what he was doing until the business crashed. I suspect that would have cost us a lot more than just a fine to the inland revenue. Thank you. I made the appropriate non-committal noises. Over lunch, the conversation was light and amusing, until we were having coffee when Ambrose threw a pointed question at me. Why did you take an interest in our company? I waffled a little, saying my principals were always interested in a possibly buy-in. He shook his head in disbelief. It wouldn't have anything to do with Bennington first and foremost, would it, Chad? Well, or the fact that a young woman bearing the same name as yours left suddenly? I raised my hands as a surrendering soldier would do. Okay, you've got me. He grinned. Is she your wife? Terry Dax joined the Inquisition. I nodded. But you're not together anymore. No, I confirmed her thoughts sadly. Ambrose gave me a look of sympathy. It will not help you, but she wasn't the only one. Bennington was a rather busy man in that area. You knew? I was a little testy. No, the police interviewed the staff, and it would appear that some of them were aware of what he was up to. The police also found a bottle of liquid in his desk drawer. When it was tested, it turned out to be one of those nasty drugs that bounders will slip into a girl's drink. Terry Dax came over to me and laid a motherly hand on my arm. That knowledge may help. She wasn't in control of herself. I shook my head. She was in control of herself when she went to lunch with him all those times. I can't see that his drugging her made any difference. She shouldn't have been there in the first place. My outburst put a damper on the conversation. Ambrose picked up and asked an innocuous question. You live quite close to Chelmsford, I believe. I gratefully accepted the change of topic. Yes, I live in Abbasroding. Oh, how lovely. Terry gushed. The Ruthings are beautiful villages. The conversation then centered on the delights of English villages as places to live. I was preparing not to outstay my welcome and said that I should leave. Then the general made another intuitive comment. That Mr. Weston is a rather difficult man to deal with. We asked what I believed to be a very reasonable price for the shares, but he offered so little. To accept, we would be giving them away. I suspect he is a bit of a rogue. I smiled. You may well be right, Ambrose. He's an East End lad as I am. I think he does a little ducking and diving. Ambrose grinned. I believe that is what is called being economical with the truth. Whatever. We had quite a few like that in the army. Always on charges for one thing or another, but bloody good soldiers all the same. The ones you would want around when things were getting difficult. As I drove home, I reflected on what Ambrose had revealed. So Bennington was a serial seducer and Lily was but one of his successes. It didn't make a difference to my decision. If his playing around were common knowledge in the office, then Lily should have been forewarned. She allowed him to take her for lunch over many weeks. She should have known what his purpose was, and she continued to see him. To me, that meant acceptance of that purpose. Hearing that Bennington had been sent down for a sentence of 2 years was for me an anticlimax. The pig would serve his sentence at an open prison as he wasn't judged to be dangerous. Well, to the general population he wasn't, but to other men's wives? That was a different story. What did cheer me up was that in his divorce his wife did indeed take him to the cleaners. When he came out of prison he would be homeless, probably penniless, and would never get employment again at the level he had once enjoyed and abused. Vin could not find anything pertaining to Haskins and Wello apart from the short report in the paper. I was content. No, I bloody wasn't. I was forever without the one person who had made my life happy, and they had done that to me. Fate had not finished with me yet. It still had surprises up its sleeve. The General and Mrs. Dax had kept in touch. I wouldn't describe them as close friends now, but friendly acquaintances. Elwyn Dax Limited had recommenced operating after the investigation, the Inland Revenue having decided that they wouldn't apply for liquidation, but needed a strong hand at the helm. I had sat in with them this day to interview a couple of applicants to fill Bennington's chair. One of them I thought particularly suitable, although either of them would do well. After the applicants had left, we sat in the boardroom with a cup of tea and discussed the applicants. They both agreed with me on the CV of the one and wanted to make him an offer. I had to point out that the salary and bonus structure would have to be high to get him. I agree he is the best candidate, but doubt he would come here for the package that you can afford to offer. The company is operating on a fair-size overdraft. Economies have to be in place until that is reduced. Perhaps you should settle for Mr. Seddon. I think he will do a good job, and the company can afford him. Chad, you have your accountant's hat on, quipped Ambrose. I thought that was why you asked me to sit in? I smiled and so did he. Terry Dax settled it. I think we should listen to Chad. He's given us good advice before, and we should accept his advice now, Ambrose. He nodded. Agreed. Terry Dax then changed the topic. Chad, have you given thought to your wife at all?
No.
You should, you know. I think she is just as much a victim in this as you were. Why do you think that, Terry? From what you have said, and from what we have learned from the investigation, Bennington was a skilled seducer. He was her boss, and as an employee she would be inclined to follow his instructions. No one talked about his activities until the police questioned them, so it was not common knowledge. I doubt that she understood what he intended, and I am sure he spun a good story. If then he used that drug, well, I would think any number of girls would fall for it. For months my position was that Lily had been aware of what she was doing. I had clung to that notion, yet Terry had suggested a scenario that was completely plausible. Lily had never been subservient, but she was very conscientious about her job and would carry out her boss's instructions to the letter. If she had no inkling of his reputation, I doubt that she would question those instructions, and then suddenly it was too late. With Terry's words in mind, I drove out of the yard and turned left. If I were to ask Lily back, would she do that again? My gut feeling was no, she wouldn't. There was a supermarket just a few hundred yards away, and on the spur of the moment I decided to pop in and get a few supplies. I particularly needed washing powder. My cleaner, Mrs. Salby, had taken over the washing after I had an incident. I had run out of washing powder and clean shirts at the same time, so I put a load in and used washing up liquid as a substitute. Bad move. I had to cycle the whole wash 3 times before getting the suds out of my shirts. Even then they smelt of detergent for days. Mrs. Salby had different views. The powder drawer was quite big, and she believed that it had to be filled. I could not understand why she was adding washing powder to my need list almost every other week, until one day I happened to be home when she did the washing. Diplomatically, I showed her the little scoop that came with the powder, explaining the manufacturer's recommendation. Thereafter, I only had to buy washing powder once every 6 weeks. I picked up a basket and strolled into the supermarket. It was a shock to see Lily at the checkout. I thought it was Lily, although she was wearing a hat with a veil over her face. Were those bloody fates taking an interest in me again, giving me a nudge? I did my shopping as quickly as I could and went to the same till as she had used. She was of course long gone by then. I chatted with the checkout girl. The lady with the veil, I think I recognized her. Oh yes, Mrs. Martin. She lives just round the corner, comes in every day. Why the veil? I think she has a skin condition. I'm not exactly sure. I've only been here 4 weeks. You don't know the address? No, I know it's Hathaway Road, but that's all. I came out in 2 minds. It was one of those brain and heart battles. No, said my brain, she's no longer in your life. Remember what she did. And then the part of the brain that governs curiosity stepped in. What skin condition? Lily didn't have that when she was with me. Her complexion was completely healthy. Then my heart jumped in on the side of curiosity, reiterating the words of Terry Dax. I found Hathaway Road. It was one of those long roads you would find within easy reach of the town center everywhere. Long terraces of Edwardian homes, built for those who were called artisans in the years before the First World War. Bow front sash windows with an angular slated roof jutting from just below the first-floor windows. They had once been popular and well-proportioned homes. Now they seemed to be divided into flats and bedsits. The local council provided wheeled bins for rubbish, ignoring the fact that as terraced houses there was nowhere for the bin to go except the front gardens. The Edwardians had not envisaged a time when almost every family would have a car, so hadn't provided for garaging space. The road was lined with cars parked either side. Some appear to have been there forever, judging by the flat tires, the dirty condition of grime mixed with pigeon droppings and detritus underneath them. I slipped into the first space that offered itself. Choosing the nearest door, I knocked. After a while, a woman's face peered round as the door opened to about 6 inches. "Yes? I am sorry to bother you. I am looking for a lady, a Mrs. Martin. Do you know what number she lives at?" "No." The door was shutting when I added quickly, "She wears a hat and veil." The door opened slightly again. "I've seen her walking down the road. She lives somewhere down there." She pointed to the right. "Thank you." The door shut before I had even got those words out. I got back in the car debating whether to drive further or keep the parking space I had. I drove further hoping to get lucky with the parking. I drove about 200 yards and then started looking to park. Again, I was lucky as a space appeared. I was dubious about parking there as there seemed to be a lot of broken glass in the road. However, I couldn't see another space, so backed in. I chose another door at random and knocked. I waited for a few minutes and getting no response went next door. This door did open and a Pakistani gentleman glowered at me. I explained my quest. The description of the lady with a veil again brought a response and his face became less aggressive. "I don't know her name, but she lives just over there at number 316. I think it's the ground floor flat." I thanked him and crossed the road to find 316. At some time, the front wall to the garden had been knocked down, presumably to provide a parking area. Now it was just used for the wheelie bins. There were 2 bell pushes, one labeled top flat. The other had no sign and I assumed it was for the ground floor flat. I pushed the button. As I waited, my stomach got that fluttery feeling. Why was I nervous? The door opened and we stood looking at each other. She was wearing the hat and veil. It seemed like 5 minutes before she spoke. "Well, look who the wind has blown in." "Hello, Lily." "That's it? Kick me out and after all these months, just turn up on the doorstep with a, 'Hello, Lily?' It was just a greeting." She shrugged. "I suppose you had better come in," she said ungraciously, then turned and walked away. I followed, allowing the door to close behind me. The door to her flat was the first on the right, and she held it for me to enter. The place was furnished after a fashion with what looked like second-hand furniture, but little of it. One chair, a small table, and an electric fire where the chimney breast used to be. To one side, its back to the window, was a portable television on a low table. I looked around, then turned to her as she took off the hat and veil. I was shocked beyond belief. "Bloody hell. What happened to you?" Her face was a mess. It looked like a plastic model of a face that had melted. Great areas of angry red tissue covered her forehead and the left side of her face. Her lips had almost disappeared. She stared back, challenging me. I could see the anger. "Come to see what you had done, Chad. We'll have a good look. You only have to see it once. I will see it in the mirror every day for the rest of my life." The fury in her voice was unmistakable. "Lily, what happened? As if you didn't know." She sneered. "This is the result of acid being thrown in your face. Did you think it would look like this?" "What are you talking about? What did you mean when you said as if I didn't know?" The challenging stare slipped a little. "Oh, don't act the innocent with me. You know bloody well what I am talking about." "Lily, I have absolutely no idea." She looked unsure now. "The man who did it said, 'This is revenge.' I thought, supposed it was you who had it done." I shook my head sadly. "How long were we together, Lily?" 6 years, 3 months and 17 days. The answer came so quickly and confidently that I was shocked. "Did you not come to know me well in those 6 years, 3 months and, what was it? 17 days? Do you honestly believe that I would do something, or have something like this done to you? Something so hateful and full of spite? Was that how you saw me?" Tears ran from under eyelids that would no longer close properly. She shook her head. "No, I couldn't. But only one other would hate me as much as you did." "And who was that other, Lily?" "It was me," she cried. "Me. It was me," she cried. "Me." Her emotion was real. "No, Lily, I didn't hate you. I hated what you did, but not you. Never you." She shuddered with sobs racking her body. I fished in my pocket to pull out my handkerchief, thankful that I had taken a clean one from the drawer that morning. I offered it to her, and that brought a fresh bout of sobbing as she took it. 10 minutes, or it could have been 15, I don't know. She seemed to get herself together. She handed me back my handkerchief. Why did you come here, Chad? You know you are bringing back all the hurt again? I saw you in the supermarket. I wasn't sure if it was you, but the girl at the checkout told me it was a Mrs. Martin, and she also told me you lived in Hathaway Road. So I thought I would call to see if it was you, and if you were all right. She looked at me calmly and I shook my head. No, Lily, honestly I don't know why I came to see you. One part of me said no, don't drag up the past. The other said go see her. Even as I crossed the road and rang the bell, I was still conflicted and my stomach was tying itself in knots. She nodded. Yes, Chad, that sounds more like the truth. I'm sorry for the tears. Would you like a cup of tea? That would be good. I'm as dry as the Sahara. She want to put the kettle on. Come through, Chad. That's if you can stand the sight of me. She showed me through to the back room, which was her kitchen. Thank you for the allowance you send me. It's godsend now as I can't get work anymore. They take one look at my face, and I can see the rejection in their attitude. She went on. I had to sell the car. I couldn't afford the running costs and I needed the money. I could understand that. As she waited for the kettle to boil, she took some skin cream and anointed her face. Is that something the hospital recommended? She shook her head, whispering something. I didn't hear that. What did you say? She faced me and squared her shoulders. I didn't go to the hospital, she said. I exploded. For Christ's sake, Lily. Why? Tears slid in globules over the cream and down her cheeks. I thought it was you. I was so certain that you arranged it, and if I went to the hospital the police would investigate, and they would come and arrest you. And I didn't want you to get into trouble. I had caused you enough pain without adding to it. The words tumbled out. I was struck dumb. She had accepted the pain and the destruction of her face purely because she thought I would be in trouble with the police. To say that I was astounded and humbled would be an understatement. Lily, even if I had caused this to happen, you should have gone to the hospital. You needed treatment. Whoever arranged the attack deserves all the punishment that's coming. If you had gone to hospital, at least the police would have a chance of finding the culprit. I had to emphasize my denial. Lily, it wasn't me. I couldn't do that to you. She looked into my eyes as if reading the thoughts behind them, and then nodded in acceptance. Exactly what happened, and how did you cope if you didn't call an ambulance? It was a Monday, and I was getting ready for work when the doorbell rang. I answered it. There was a skinny man there, tall but very thin, and he asked if I was Mrs. Martin. I said yes, and he said, "This is revenge." I seemed to recall a glass bottle in his hand as he swung it around, and the next thing I knew was this cold liquid on my face. Then it started to burn and I could smell it. I knew it was acid. He ran as soon as the stuff hit my face. I think I had closed my eyes instinctively. I felt my way back in here and tried to find a cloth to wipe it off, but then some memory about diluting acid came to me. I found my way into the bathroom and got under the shower. It was very cold. I think I stayed there for about an hour. I was soaking wet, my clothes and my hair. I was chilled to the bone, but my face was still burning. I opened my eyes and looked in the mirror. I saw a red blistered mass of flesh, all puffed up. I knew then that I would never look pretty again. Remembering and recounting the episode had brought on her tears again. There was nothing I could do except put my arms around her. She used my hanky to dry yet more tears. My mind was in turmoil, yet suddenly from those swirling thoughts there was a sudden ray of light. Bennington. Lily turned from pouring the tea. What about him? Bennington did it. How do you work that out? Can we sit down? I have a story to tell you. She told me to sit in the only armchair, and she pulled out a dining chair from the table. I explained the whole thing of Bennington, Haskins, and Wello. What I had done to get revenge, and as I told the story I realized that Lily's initial reaction was right and wrong. It was my actions. I had started the sequence of events that injured her. If I hadn't taken revenge on Bennington, Lily would not have had to suffer this despicable attack. What I did has ruined Bennington. He will probably go to prison. And I had to let him know that it was your husband who did this to him. I needed him to know. Perhaps he decided to hit back, and you took the pain. Lily, I am so sorry. I didn't think for a moment that it would rebound on you. I don't see it that way, Chad. I am pleased that you took your revenge. If it was Bennington, then what happened to me was an unforeseen side effect. You seem to take it lightly. Lily smiled bitterly. It doesn't matter anymore. She indicated her face. This happened, and there is nothing that will ever make it better. I had made my mind up a while ago that she was willing to suffer all this agony alone, simply to protect me from what she thought would be arrest and punishment told volumes. Whatever she had done, surely she had paid penance now. To my mind, a greater penance than anyone could ask for. She had accepted disfigurement to keep me from supposed imprisonment. I owed Lily a life. Cautiously, I asked, "Lily, will you come back home?" Call it compassion, sympathy, guilt, whatever. I told you that I couldn't stop loving you, and I haven't. I wanted you to suffer as I was suffering. I wanted you to feel the pain that I felt, but never in 1,000 years would I have wished on you the pain that you have borne. We will take you to a cosmetic surgeon and see what can be done. But please, Lily, come home with me. I want to take care of you. She shook her head. No, Chad, I can't do that. She held up her hand to stop me saying anything. Let me say here and now, Chad, I loved you then, and I love you now. I would be over the moon to think that we could get together, and it would be as before. But it wouldn't be. I hurt you so badly. It wasn't deliberate. Even so, I destroyed something. I can't just walk back as if nothing had happened. You would still look at me and see this face and why it is like it is. Then your anger would return. That is something we have to talk about. We both have to understand. I have talked with Mrs. Dax, and she has told me some things that make me think I didn't know the full story. Mrs. Dax? I could hear the astonishment in her voice. Yes, I suppose you could say that I am now acquainted with her and with Lieutenant General Stanley. After all, I interfered with their business to get rid of Bennington, and they now seem to view me as some kind of business advisor. What did she say? It would appear that Bennington was a serial seducer. You, Lily, were one of quite a few. Only once he had been dismissed would anyone say anything about it. I would imagine that he was skilled with words and wove a story that would pull you in. He did. He invited me to lunch, saying that it was something he occasionally did with all employees. He told me that the company was in difficulties. I thought he was wrong to tell me that. He went on to say that he had a chance to pull in a new client who would give us business on a regular basis over months, if not years. If he could get their contract, then the redundancies he had planned would not be needed. He told me that I could help him. I wanted to help. The only thing I thought was odd was that he would always insist we went in my car. That sounds right. Flatter you that he needed your help, and then lay a guilt trip on you if you didn't come through. You would be to blame if your friends and colleagues lost their jobs. As for the car, I suspect that jag of his was easily recognizable, and if he was driving a pretty young lady around the town, it would get back. When you say it like that, it sounds plausible. She looked at me to see if she had used the right word, something she would do occasionally when we talked at home. That little gesture really tugged at my heartstrings. Tell me, Chad, you seem to know the routine. Are you a serial seducer? She had a slight smile. A smile that used to be the fillip to my day. The smile that made my life worthwhile. No, Lily. The only girl I ever wanted to seduce was you. You seem as if you knew what he was doing. She shook her head. You were the only man I wanted to seduce me. She gave me a sad smile. But in answer to your question, no, I didn't. Not at the time. He said he was going to entertain these two men from this company to lunch and asked me if I would act as hostess, making drinks, being nice to them. Well, that was the sort of work a receptionist would do. That was my job, only it was at a hotel rather than in the office. I had no idea if he planned what happened. I have had months to think it over and still can't understand why I was so stupid. I needed to ask the difficult question. On the DVD, she seemed quite happy to take the lead in her own seduction. I'm sorry to ask this, but you seemed to be quite happy at that lunch. I think I was. The talks with Mr. Haskins and Mr. Wello were going well, although I won't pretend that I understood it all. It looked as if we were going to get the contract. I was happy, as I remember, very happy, and I suppose flirtatious. They had been very nice to me, complimenting me all the time, telling me that my smile had made their day. Women respond to that. I don't know where the idea of taking my clothes off came from. I suppose I did it to say I appreciated their behavior and make them happy. I didn't think that they would take it as a sign that I was ready to have sex with them. How stupid is that? Women know that if they take their clothes off for a man, he will get aroused. Yet it didn't occur to me. It didn't ever enter my mind. I believe he did plan what happened. I have been told he used a drug on many occasions. Probably slipped into your drink. I suspect your euphoria, lack of inhibition, and fuddled brain was down to that. Lily shook her head. No, Chad, I was making the drinks. That was why I was there. Not all the drinks, Lily. Just after lunch. He poured the drinks. I don't think so, Chad. It was on the DVD, Lily. He poured the drinks on that one occasion. Are you sure? Positive. I don't remember that. The full import of the possibilities obviously opened her eyes, and understanding arrived with her. The creep. She suddenly screamed. In all the time I had known Lily, she had never sworn. I wanted to clear up the suggestion that she may have gone to a room with him on another occasion. Was that the only time? Yes. Thinking back, I believe there was a time when he was going to try. One of the girls told me after that Friday that he had booked a room a couple of weeks before. I couldn't go as I was filling in for one of the secretaries who had gone home feeling unwell that day. God, I wished someone else could have been unwell that Friday. Lily's tone when telling me that was so matter-of-fact that I was in doubt that she told the truth. Retelling the story was quite emotional for her, and she wept again. I went to comfort her. She muttered imprecations and called Bennington all the names under the sun. I said nothing as the extent of his manipulations came home. Suddenly her arms clasped me. "Oh, Chad, I am so very, very sorry." My sodden handkerchief came out again to dry her tears. I raised her face and kissed her. Her lips were thin remnants of those she had before, yet I kissed her lips. Lily was shocked. "How can you do that? I am ugly and scarred." "You are still the Lily I fell in love with." "Yes, you were pretty, but I fell in love with the person you were, not how you looked." "You are still that person. That person is beautiful, and I still love that person." The tears still ran down her face at odds with the smile she now wore. "Can I change my mind? May I come home, please, Chad? I want you to come home." Lily had not taken all her clothes with her when I made her leave, and her wardrobe was just as she left it. Her expression was wonderful to see as she ran her hands over the dresses and suits. One dress and one suit she picked out, throwing them angrily on the floor. "Those go in the rubbish." I had wanted to throw them away, but could never bring myself to open Lily's wardrobe. It would be like opening the box of sorrows. She replaced her cosmetics in the bathroom, although remarking as she did so, "I won't have use for them, but I am happy to see them back on this shelf." She stopped suddenly as she came out of the bathroom. "Chad, would you prefer that I sleep in the spare room?" "No, I wouldn't," I replied firmly. "I want you back where you belong, in our bed sleeping next to me. This is no halfway house situation. We will make it together or fail together, but I don't expect failure. As far as your makeup is concerned, I am glad it is back on that shelf. I have had all too much space there for the last months. We will find a good cosmetic surgeon too, so you never know, you may have use for them again." Abbas Roding did not have such a thing as a takeaway food shop of any description, not even that British necessity, the ubiquitous fish and chip shop. It was well into the evening when I got Lily back home, so I drove down to the pub and asked Bernard, the landlord, if he could plate up a couple of meals. I had dined there often over the months without Lily, and he was happy to do that. We sat down together for the first time in 18 months. She was very emotional, but we enjoyed the meal. Lily washed the plates in the sink, her hands submerged in the hot soapy water, humming happily, dried them and packed them back into the bag Bernard had lent me. For a while she wandered around the house, touching chairs, tables, ornaments. I watched fondly as she reacquainted with these familiar surroundings, knowing that I was right to ask her to come home. It was strange preparing for bed. We were both hesitant, finding little last-minute chores to address, postponing the moment, fearful that the spark had flickered and died with the 18 months apart. Yet when we did slip into bed, I rolled towards Lily, and she came into my arms so naturally that the time apart became insignificant. High emotion as we had experienced that day drained the body, and we were both tired. Making love was not a priority. Becoming a couple again was, and holding each other tight was one way in which we could do that. Taking Lily in my arms as we snuggled into the warmth of our bed was one of the happiest times of my life. It was pleasure, contentment, and joy all served together as one emotion. Lily sighed heavily. 6 hours ago, I would have said that I would never enjoy my husband's arms around me ever again. Yet I am here, and he is here, and he is holding me as he used to. 6 hours for my life to change completely. Thank you, Chad. Thank you for being strong enough to forgive me. Thank you for loving me enough to overlook my ugly face. And thank you for just being you, my strength and support. I moved slightly and kissed her lips. Silent tears were rolling down her cheeks. I wiped them away. They are tears of happiness, Chad, my darling man. Happiness. Work was placed on the back burner for a few days, as Lily and I reconnected in everyday life. I had made few changes in our house, just moving 1 or 2 ornaments and taking down pictures that had become a little too emotional for me to live with. Slowly, unobtrusively, Lily found them. She didn't replace them where they had been before. She found another resting place. Without words, she acknowledged that our previous life was gone and that we had to make a new one together, and she was helping to build that. We didn't go out in the village. Even with her hat and veil, she was self-conscious about the injuries to her face. When I did get back to work, the message service had plenty for me to do. Frank had phoned a number of times, and I returned his call as a priority. He was terse at first, berating me for not being there when he wanted to speak to me. Then his tone changed. "I see that Lily is back." I shouldn't have been surprised he knew that. Frank has ways of keeping tabs on all those he considers useful to him. Yes. So, you are human after all, Jess. I am glad to know that. Welcome to the real world. I hear that she had an accident. I wouldn't call it an accident. Why? What happened? I smiled inwardly. Frank's information conduit was not as good as he thought. Some pig threw acid in her face. Shit. There was silence for a while. Frank had seen the photo I kept of Lily in my office and had often said he couldn't understand how I managed to get a woman as good-looking as her. Who did it? He asked eventually. I don't know. All she said was that he was a tall, skinny bloke. I do have my suspicions about who wanted it done. The skinny bloke would be Harry Splash. He's the only evil little slime that would do that. I'll have words with him and find out. When you do, let me know. No, Jess, your way will not work now. You would balk at the punishment needed for this. Faces see you as being on my team, and I have to maintain respect. I can't have others thinking that they can do this to one of my friends and get away with it. Frank never spoke about the incident again. I knew he would not have forgotten it. Having Lily home again soon became normal. At my suggestion, she would drive me to the station in the morning and collect me in the evening. I did this so that she would have the freedom of the car during the day, but apart from shopping, she wouldn't go anywhere. Mrs. Salby came in just once a week now as Lily insisted that she would do all the housework. I suspect that Mrs. Salby was surprised to see Lily back, though I gathered was pleased that she was. She was a garrulous soul and would regale anyone who cared to listen with all the gossip from the village, but to my knowledge never told anyone about Lily's face. Of course, village life, being what it was, most inhabitants knew anyway. The garden fence network worked very efficiently. Lily didn't flaunt it, but gaining confidence had walked to the village shop once or twice without her veil. I believe she told those who asked that she had an accident with hot cooking oil. We had connected physically now. A wonderful night when unplanned we made love, clasped in each other's arms, slick with our perspiration damp upon each other after our mutual delight was a revelation. I had thought that one or both of us would feel restrained because of what had happened. Not so. There was nothing but love between us. Lily always liked to talk after making love. Well, she liked to talk at any time. As we lay there recovering, I anticipated some words from her. Surprisingly, she was silent. Joking, I asked if she had lost her tongue. No, Chad. It's just that I am lost for words. This was like our first time in Tenerife. Do you remember it? I was lost for words then. How could I forget it? You came to me and gave me not only your body, but yourself. The most precious gift anyone had ever given me. Her arms tightened on my body, an acknowledgement of the words of love. You gave me yourself too, Chad. I couldn't believe that anyone could give me so much pleasure, but you did. I felt that tonight was another honeymoon first night. It was in a way, Lily. We chose a cosmetic surgeon, a James Waterman. He of course consulted in Harley Street and would be expensive. However, he was truthful. The burnt tissue could benefit from grafts, and he could rebuild Lily's eyelids and lips. But he warned us that he could not restore her face to what it had been. He did inquire why Lily had not had hospital treatment. I explained that we were estranged at the time it happened and Lily erroneously thought I was responsible, so didn't seek medical help in order that I did not get into trouble. He was astonished. Your wife must love you very much, Mr. Martin. Lily replied. I do, Mr. Waterman. Back in the car, we discussed the consultation. I was disappointed, but Lily was pragmatic. Chad, if he can't repair my face to what I was before, it will have a benefit. I can look in the mirror and see what I am, and remember why I am this way. My face in the mirror is a warning every day not to trust glib a-holes again. I belong to you. She hesitated a moment before going on. It would be good to be able to close my eyes completely, though. They water so much. I could see her logic, although I was disappointed that she would never be the Lily I had appreciated before. The cosmetic surgery took some 3 months to complete. Lily was delighted with the results, although when they first allowed her to look in the mirror, she was horrified at the bruising. She spent 3 separate weeks in hospital with time for recuperation after each procedure. There were some small scars, although Mr. Waterman had managed to hide these under her jawline and in the wrinkles under her eyes. The most important result for Lily was that she could close her eyes properly. She would never have eyelashes, but that was little bother for a woman. False eyelashes served well. She was equally delighted that she had lips again, a feature she tested frequently, demanding kisses at any opportunity. I enjoyed the testing as well. Although it was a great improvement, Mr. Waterman had told us the truth. Even with the grafts, Lily's face still had a little of that melted plastic look, something like the aftermath of a stroke. She would live with that until her dying day. Apart from my being an accountant, Lily knew nothing about my clients and the way they made their money. I thought that some exposure of my work was needed. We sat down one weekend and I explained what I did and for whom. Also how they made their money. She surprised me by giggling. Did I say something funny? No, Chad. I just tried to picture you as a gangster. Well, no, it didn't work. Please don't get upset. But you are the last person anyone could think is being crooked. I smiled. Good. That's the impression I want to give. We talked about my retirement plan. She got very excited about that. Where would we go? I thought Spain or Cyprus would do. Wouldn't they come looking for you? I shrugged my shoulders. That will only happen if I am not careful. I will go on being careful, and in a few more years we can leave it all behind us. She was pensive looking around our home. It will be such a shame to leave here. I do love this house and the area. I had thought about this as well. The Ruthing area was a very pleasant place to live. Well, we could just buy a villa and spend the winters abroad. Her face lightened. Could we, Chad? Would that be all right? I don't see why not. If that is what you want, we can go looking now. How do you feel about a holiday in the sun? I would love it. I can buy some itsy-bitsy bikinis and get a good tan, or even go topless. And if you are very good, I will take off the bottoms as well when we are alone together. She giggled mischievously. Then you can have your wicked way with me whenever you feel like it. She paused as a lascivious gleam came to her eyes. Often, I hope. I thought I should book a holiday as soon as possible. The delights on offer were too much to wait for. I am aware that there are many men who would not have taken an unfaithful wife back. That is their choice. I chose differently. Lily was stupid and got herself into a situation that she couldn't control. I have read enough after Terry Dax mentioned it about the effect of these so-called date rape drugs to know they affect people differently. Bennington was clever. He knew just how to manipulate his chosen victim and knew exactly when to administer the drug. The outcome was that he paid, Haskins and Wello paid, and I paid for his actions. However, Lily paid most. There has to come a time when ego and pride has to be put aside and compassion, humanity, and love should guide our decisions. Not in every case, as every situation is different. My wife will live with the physical as well as mental evidence of her fall from grace for the rest of her life. Some will say that once a cheater, always a cheater, but like all aphorisms, it isn't written in stone. The local news had an item one evening regarding a certain Harold Addingham, whose dead body was pulled from the Thames by the river police. His injuries, according to the police, were inflicted before he went into the water and appeared to be an acid attack. 2 months later was a report on the evening news that once again reminded me of my conversation with Frank. It would appear that a prisoner at Sudbury Open Prison had been attacked. The culprit had used an ordinary table knife, stolen from the kitchens and roughly sharpened, to saw at the victim's face and neck. The injuries were not life-threatening. However, the victim would be horrendously scarred for life. The victim was a W.A. Bennington. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.